I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin.
My name is Evelyn Carter, and what I'm about to tell you still feels unreal, even after all these years. It started the morning of my husband Harold's funeral, the quietest, most hollow day of my life. I remember the chill that ran through me as the pastor's voice faded under the sound of wind brushing against the trees. I stood beside his grave, clutching a bouquet of white lilies, when my phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen. I'm alive. That's not me in the coffin. For a moment, I thought my mind had broken from grief. My hands trembled so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. I replied, "Who are you?" The response came almost instantly. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust Jake or Daniel." Those few words cracked my heart open. My own sons, my boys, the ones I had raised with love and sacrifice, were now part of some dark warning? I looked toward the casket again, toward Jake and Daniel standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces calm, too calm, their eyes dry, their hands cold as they hugged me after the service. Something in me knew something was wrong. Harold and I had been married for 42 years. He was my anchor, my best friend, the man who built our life from nothing in the small town of Willowbrook. We met when I was 24, a shy girl working as a house cleaner to support my sick mother. Harold repaired bicycles in a little workshop he'd inherited from his father. We didn't have much, but back then, happiness wasn't measured in money. He used to tease me for wearing the same faded blue dress every Sunday. "You look like summer in that dress, Evelyn," he'd say, wiping grease off his hands. I'd laugh, pretending not to blush. One afternoon, he stopped me outside his shop and said, "Need me to fix your bike?" I didn't even own a bike, but I smiled and said, "Maybe I'll buy one, just so I can come back." That was the beginning. We fell in love under the willow trees in Town Square, where he'd bring me lemonade and talk about dreams, small ones, like owning a house, maybe a car someday. When we married, we had only a tin-roofed two-bedroom home, leaky whenever it rained, but it was ours. The nights were filled with laughter, warmth, and the quiet sound of Harold's tools clinking in his shop while I sewed clothes for the women in town. Then came Jake, our firstborn, bright-eyed, always curious. 2 years later, Daniel, gentler but always following his big brother's lead. I poured every bit of my soul into raising them. I made sure their bellies were full, even when mine wasn't. Harold took them fishing on Sundays, told bedtime stories, taught them how to fix a leaky faucet, patch a tire, live honestly. We were a family, whole and simple, or so I thought. But something began to shift when the boys grew older. Jake, even as a teenager, talked about money, about success. "Dad," he'd say, "why do we live like this? Don't you ever want more?" Harold would smile softly. "Son, having enough to sleep peacefully at night, that's already more than most have." Jake didn't understand. Neither did Daniel, who mirrored every thought his brother had. When Harold offered Jake a job at the workshop after graduation, he refused with a sneer. "I'm not spending my life fixing old bikes like you, Dad. I'm meant for bigger things." I still remember Harold's silence after that. The way he sat on the porch, staring at the stars, whispering, "Guess my boy's dreams don't include me anymore." The years rolled on. Jake moved to the city, joined a real estate firm. Daniel followed soon after, always one step behind him. They started earning money, real money, and at first I was so proud. My sons had made it out of poverty. But pride slowly turned to distance. Their visits grew shorter, their calls colder. When they did come, they brought fancy gifts we didn't need, an expensive coffee maker we never used, a watch Harold refused to wear. They'd look around our modest home with polite discomfort, as if it embarrassed them. Mom, Dad, Jake once said, adjusting his silk tie, you should move somewhere nicer. This place looks like it's falling apart. He was right. The house was old, but it was where our lives had unfolded. Every nail, every creak held a memory. Harold only smiled. Jake, this house raised us. It's done its job just fine. Still, I saw it. That look of pity in Jake's eyes, and when Daniel nodded beside him, I felt a cold realization our sons no longer saw us as family, just relics of a life they'd outgrown. Then Jake married Sophie, a city woman with perfect hair, expensive perfume, and eyes that judged everything. The first time she stepped into our home, she barely touched my hand. Her heels sank into the dirt on the porch, and she muttered, "Oh, quaint." That evening at dinner, she hardly ate. I'd made Harold's favorite meatloaf, but Sophie just moved the food around her plate. Jake leaned over and whispered to her, "Next time, we'll eat out." He thought I didn't hear, but I did. Every word burned. From then on, things were never the same. Daniel remained single but changed too, impatient, constantly on his phone, talking about deals and clients even during our conversations. When Harold and I grew older, our house got quieter. He kept working in his shop, though his hands trembled with age. I kept sewing, though my eyes failed me. We survived on little, never asking our sons for help. One night, Harold said something that has haunted me ever since. "Evelyn, money hasn't just changed our boys, it's erased us." I told him not to talk like that, but deep down, I knew he was right. Soon after, Jake bought a huge house worth more than anything Harold and I had ever dreamed of. Daniel followed, buying a sleek condo. They became strangers who shared our last name. During one visit, Sophie smiled and said, "You know, Evelyn, there are really lovely retirement homes in the city. You'd have friends, activities, comfort." I forced a smile. But that word retirement home sliced through me. After a lifetime of building our own walls, they wanted to put us behind someone else's? Harold, always gentle but proud, replied, "We're fine right here. We don't need a home. We have one." I'll never forget the look they exchanged then, a silent agreement I couldn't read. A few weeks later, Jake arrived with documents. "Mom, Dad," he said, too politely, "I found a buyer for your place. We could sell this place and use the money to get you somewhere better." Harold's jaw tightened. "There's no place better than home." That was the first time I saw it. The flicker of irritation in Jake's face, the impatience in Daniel's tone when he said, "You can't live like this forever. You're old now." That night, Harold whispered, "Something's not right, Evelyn. They're in a hurry for something. Something dark." He was right. I just didn't know how dark it would become. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Harold's words echoed in my head. They're in a hurry for something. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant, but the days that followed began to show the cracks that had been quietly forming beneath our family's surface. Jake and Daniel started visiting more frequently, but not out of love or concern. They came with folders, papers, and numbers, always about the future, as they called it. The visits no longer felt like family gatherings, they felt like business meetings I hadn't agreed to attend. "Mom," Jake said one afternoon, spreading out papers on our kitchen table, "we've talked it over. This house is barely worth anything, maybe $1,000 at best. If you sell it, we can add some of our savings and get you something modern, safer." He smiled that practiced city smile, polite but hollow. Harold's eyes narrowed. "Safer from what, Jake? From our memories?" Jake sighed, exasperated. Dad, I'm trying to help. You can't live like this forever. You're 70, for God's sake. Daniel, who had been quiet until then, added softly, It's time to rest, Dad. You've worked your whole life. Harold looked at them both and said something I'll never forget. Work is not what's killing me, boys. What's killing me is realizing how little you understand what it means to live with pride. The conversation ended with silence, a silence so sharp it could have cut glass. From that day, a strange tension filled the air. They stopped pretending to care about the house or the shop. Their tone became impatient, their visits shorter but more insistent. They began showing up with real estate agents, without warning, without our consent. Once, I found a man in a suit walking through our backyard, measuring with a tape. When I asked what he was doing, he said, Just appraising the property, ma'am. Jake sent me. My blood boiled. This land isn't for sale, I snapped, my voice shaking with fury. He stammered an apology and left, but the damage was done. That evening, I confronted Jake over the phone. Who told you to bring strangers into my house? He answered in that tired, condescending tone. Mom, I'm just trying to make your life easier. You don't understand how property works anymore. That line, you don't understand, stung worse than any insult, as if being old meant being stupid. Over the next few weeks, the pressure mounted. They wanted Harold to retire, to close the workshop that had been his life's work for over 40 years. Dad, it's dangerous, Daniel said during dinner one night. Your tools are old. What if something happens to you? Harold set down his fork. You mean, what if I keep living my life? Jake leaned forward, his patience slipping. We're just worried. You could get hurt. Harold met his gaze with quiet strength. I've been hurt before, son, but never by my own family. Don't let that change tonight. The silence that followed was thick with shame, though I could tell they didn't feel any. The next morning, I found Harold sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon. He said, They're planning something, Evelyn. Something they don't want us to see. I brushed his hand. You think they'd go that far? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. 3 weeks later, the phone rang. It was a Tuesday morning. I was making Harold's favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the voice on the other end spoke fast and cold. Mrs. Carter, this is Memorial Hospital. Your husband is in a serious accident. You need to come immediately. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. My knees buckled and I gripped the counter to stay upright. An accident? What kind of accident? Is he alive? The nurse hesitated. Please come quickly. Betty, my neighbor, drove me to the hospital because I couldn't even hold the keys. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and rain. When we arrived, my sons were already there, Jake and Daniel, both dressed in dark suits. That was the first thing that struck me. No one had called them yet. The hospital had called me first. Mom, Jake said, rushing toward me. Dad's in bad shape. One of the machines in the shop exploded. An explosion? I whispered. Harold knew every wire and bolt in that shop. Nothing about that sounded right. When they finally let me see him, my breath left my body. Harold lay unconscious, wrapped in white bandages, tubes and machines surrounding him. The sound of the monitor was the only thing keeping me sane. I took his hand, the only part of him untouched, and whispered, Harold, it's me. You come back, you hear me? For a moment, I felt the faintest squeeze. His eyelids fluttered. He was still fighting. The doctor said he was in critical condition, that the burns were severe, that there was a chance he'd never wake up. I stayed by his bed for days, sleeping in an antique hospital chair. Jake and Daniel took turns coming in, but they never stayed long. They spent more time talking to doctors and making phone calls. One afternoon, I heard Jake's voice outside the room. The life insurance should cover at least 50,000, maybe 75 if the claim goes through. Good, Daniel replied. That'll be enough to clear everything. My stomach turned. My husband was lying there, barely breathing, and they were calculating insurance payouts? I confronted Jake later that day. Why are you talking about money? He's not gone yet. Jake looked startled for a moment, then forced a smile. Mom, we're just preparing in case. You'll need to know about these things. I wanted to slap him. The only thing I need, I said, is my husband to live. That night, I sat by Harold's side, whispering prayers. Around midnight, his fingers twitched again. His lips moved faintly, but no sound came out. I leaned close, desperate to hear. What is it, Harold? Tell me. Then the nurse walked in and said, Sometimes they have involuntary spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew. He was trying to tell me something. 2 days later, I woke up to alarms blaring down the hospital corridor. I ran to Harold's room, my heart pounding. Doctors surrounded him, shouting orders. No, I screamed. No, please. 40 minutes later, at 4:37 a.m., my husband was pronounced dead. I collapsed beside him, clutching his still hand. His skin was warm, too warm for death. I begged him to wake up. Jake and Daniel arrived within an hour, looking calm, too calm. They already had papers for funeral arrangements, contacts for insurance claims, even the number of a funeral home in town. How did you have all this ready? I asked through tears. Jake placed a hand on my shoulder. We just want to make things easier for you, Mom. Easier. That word felt poisonous. The funeral was arranged hastily. Jake handled everything without asking me what Harold would have wanted. He chose a plain casket, a brief service. It's what Dad would have preferred, he said. But Harold deserved more than a quiet burial. He deserved a farewell filled with love and gratitude, not efficiency and indifference. The day of the funeral, the sky was gray and heavy. I wore the same black dress I'd worn at my mother's funeral. My hands trembled so much that Betty had to button it for me. Be strong, Evelyn. Harold would want that. But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow. Only a few people came, just us, the pastor, and a handful of neighbors. For a man who'd helped half the town, it was far too small. Where are all the workers from his shop? I asked Jake. He didn't look at me. Dad didn't want a big crowd. That was a lie. Harold loved people. He loved Willowbrook. As the casket was lowered, I felt my body go weak. Betty caught me before I fell. Then, just as the pastor said his final prayer, my phone buzzed again. Another message. I'm alive. That's not me in the coffin. My heart froze. I replied with shaking fingers, Who are you? The answer came seconds later. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust Jake or Daniel. The phone slipped from my hands. Betty bent to pick it up, but I stopped her. I didn't want anyone to see. Jake walked over. Mom, are you okay? I stared into his eyes, searching for any trace of my boy, but I saw only a stranger. I'm fine, I lied. I just need to go home. On the way back, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. Could Harold somehow be alive, or was someone playing a cruel joke? That night, sitting alone in our empty house, I replayed everything in my head. The rushed funeral, the strange calm on my son's faces, the money talk, the missing coworkers, the clean shop. Harold's explosion didn't add up. He was too careful, too experienced. And how did my sons get to the hospital before me if I was the one the hospital had called? Nothing made sense. When I opened Harold's ill desk that night, I found the folder where we kept all our papers. Inside was a life insurance document, just as Jake had said, but something was off. The policy had been increased 6 months ago from $5,000 to $50,000. Harold had never told me about that. And there was another, a separate policy purchased 2 months before his death for workplace accidents. Someone had been planning something, and the more I looked, the clearer it became. The only people who could benefit from Harold's death were the same ones who called me Mom. That night, I didn't sleep a single minute. The message, the insurance policy, the calm on my son's faces, all of it kept spinning in my mind like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold's face, heard his voice whispering, "They're in a hurry for something." By dawn, I knew one thing. If I wanted answers, I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own children. I went to the police station the next morning, clutching the life insurance papers like proof of something I couldn't yet explain. Officer Michael Turner listened quietly as I spoke, his pen barely moving. "So," he said finally, leaning back in his chair, "you're saying you believe your husband's death wasn't an accident?" I hesitated. "I don't know what to believe, officer, but something isn't right. My son's." He interrupted gently. "Mrs. Carter, these are serious accusations. Do you have evidence? Any reason to think they're involved?" I looked down at my trembling hands. "Not yet, but I can feel it." He sighed, scribbling something in his notebook. "I'll open a file, but without evidence, there's not much we can do." I left the station with a lump in my throat. The world suddenly felt heavier, smaller, lonelier. That evening, I sat in Harold's old workshop, the one they said had exploded. The walls were still scorched, the smell of burnt oil lingering. I walked slowly, touching his tools, the wooden shelves, the small clock above his desk that had stopped at 2:17 p.m., the exact time of the accident. Something caught my eye, a small blackened notebook under a pile of metal scraps. I picked it up carefully, brushing off soot. Inside were Harold's handwritten notes, sketches, receipts, dates, everything from repair orders to personal reminders. But the last entry stopped me cold. March 14th. Jake and Daniel visited. Asked about insurance again. Didn't like my answers. Something feels off. Must talk to Evelyn about the policies soon. My heart pounded. He knew. Harold had sensed something, maybe even confronted them. Later that week, Jake showed up unannounced. He looked agitated, his tie loose, his hair messy. "Mom, why did you go to the police?" The question came out like a knife. My body froze. "Who told you that?" He smirked, pacing the room. "Small town, Mom. News travels. You think I wouldn't find out?" I forced myself to stay calm. "I just needed help understanding what happened to your father." Jake's eyes darkened. "You're letting grief get to your head. Dad's gone. Accept it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You should stop asking questions. It's not healthy." That word again, healthy. The way he said it made my skin crawl. As soon as he left, I called Officer Turner. I told him everything about the notebook, the visits, the message. He listened quietly, then said, "Mrs. Carter, I'll look into this discreetly. Don't tell anyone I'm involved. For now, act normal. Act normal." Those two words became my mask. Over the next few weeks, I played the role of the grieving mother. I smiled when Jake called. I nodded when Daniel visited. I accepted Sophie's cold hugs and her tasteless casseroles. But underneath it all, I was watching, listening, waiting. One evening, while sorting through Harold's papers, I found something else. A small flash drive taped under the drawer. It was labeled "Simply Shop Footage." My hand shook as I plugged it into my laptop. A video opened, grainy security camera footage from the day Harold died. I watched in silence, my heart pounding as the seconds passed. At 2:12 p.m., Harold was working at his bench, tightening bolts on a motor. Then, a shadow entered the frame. A man, tall, wearing gloves, face hidden under a cap. He moved straight to the electrical panel. Harold turned, said something, but the man ignored him. Seconds later, sparks flashed, then the feed cut to static. The timestamp ended at 2:17. The same time the clock had stopped. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. Whoever that man was, he wasn't Harold. He sabotaged the shop. I sent the footage to Officer Turner. He called back within the hour. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we're analyzing it, but the face isn't clear. However, the gloves and jacket, they match something we've seen before." "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated. "Your son Daniel filed an insurance claim 2 days before your husband's accident on behalf of the family business. The man in the footage is wearing the same company jacket he had on when he came to the station that week." I felt dizzy. The room tilted. "No, no, that can't be." "I'm sorry, man," he said softly. "We're not jumping to conclusions, but it's not looking good." I didn't tell a soul about the footage. Not Jake, not Daniel, not Sophie. I wanted to believe there was a mistake, that Daniel couldn't do something so cruel. But the evidence was like a splinter buried deep beneath my skin. Days passed. Officer Turner said the investigation was ongoing, but I knew things moved slow in small towns like Willowbrook. And every day I waited felt like a lifetime. Then one evening, as I was locking the front door, I noticed a car parked across the street, headlights off, engine running. I could barely make out the figure inside. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the car was gone. From that night on, I never felt safe again. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail, no sender's name. Inside was a single photo, Harold standing outside the workshop the same day of the explosion. The back of the photo read, "He found out too much." I almost dropped it. Someone was trying to warn me or threaten me. That night, I met with Officer Turner again, this time in a small diner outside town. I handed him the photo. He studied it carefully. "This isn't a coincidence, Mrs. Carter. Whoever sent this wanted you to know something." "Or they wanted to scare me," I whispered. He nodded. "That too, which means you're close to the truth." That's when I made a decision. I couldn't wait for justice to find me. I would find it myself. I began writing everything down, every conversation, every visit, every word Jake and Daniel said since the funeral. I kept a hidden voice recorder under the kitchen table just in case they let something slip. And they did. 2 weeks later, Jake came by, unannounced again. He looked restless, pacing. "Mom, the insurance company's taking too long," he muttered. I played dumb. "For what, dear?" he snapped. "For Dad's claim. You signed those papers, right?" I shook my head slowly. "I never signed anything, Jake." He froze. "What?" "Your father handled all the paperwork before he died. I never touched a single form." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "Don't make this difficult, Mom." Those words, "don't make this difficult," confirmed everything. After he left, I checked the insurance office records. Using Harold's old documents, I verified the policy signatures. The digital forms were signed, but not by Harold. The signature was forged, and whoever did it used my name too. I went back to Officer Turner and handed him the evidence. He stared at the documents for a long moment, then said quietly, "We'll need more, enough to make an arrest." "Then I'll get you more," I said. That's when I revealed my plan. A week later, Jake called inviting me to dinner at Jake's house. He said, just a family night, but I could hear the unease in his voice. I agreed. Before leaving, I hid a small camera inside my purse, the one Harold had given me on our anniversary. I felt his spirit with me that night, steadying my hands. The dinner began politely enough, Sophie talking about her garden, Jake pretending to care. But as the night went on and the wine flowed, the cracks began to show. Daniel was nervous, glancing at Jake for reassurance. Finally, he blurted, "We should have just waited. Things got too messy." Jake glared at him. "Shut up, Daniel." But Daniel didn't. "You said it'd be simple. You said no one would get hurt." My breath caught. I gripped the table's edge so tightly my knuckles turned white. Sophie whispered sharply, "Lower your voices." Jake slammed his fist on the table. It was simple until Mom started digging. Every word was recorded. Every confession caught. I sat there, pretending not to hear, smiling faintly as if I were too old to understand their words. But inside, my heart was pounding with a different kind of strength. I had everything I needed. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt him beside me again, not in sorrow, but in purpose. That night, after dinner, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, staring at the little purse that now held the truth, a tiny camera filled with the voices of my sons. Every confession, every lie, every piece of the puzzle Harold had died trying to protect. I should have cried. I should have felt broken. But instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: strength. By morning, I went straight to Officer Turner's office. I placed the purse on his desk and said quietly, "It's all there. Every word they said." He plugged in the device, pressed play, and for the next 15 minutes, the room was filled with the sound of my sons' voices, panicked, angry, and guilty. "You said it'd be simple. You said no one would get hurt." "Shut up, Daniel." Until Mom started digging. When it ended, the room fell silent. Officer Turner looked at me, his face grave. "This is enough," he said. "We can move now." For the first time since Harold's funeral, I exhaled without trembling. The arrests happened quietly 2 days later. Both Jake and Daniel were taken from their offices in handcuffs. The charges: insurance fraud, conspiracy, and manslaughter. Their faces made the evening news in Willowbrook. The once successful brothers now reduced to headlines of greed and betrayal. Sophie tried to call me that night, but I didn't answer. I watched her number flash across the screen, then fade away. For the first time, silence felt peaceful. The next morning, Officer Turner called. "We found more, Mrs. Carter," he said. "The explosion wasn't just sabotage. The timer used came from Jake's company's inventory. He'd bought it under a fake name." I closed my eyes, whispering, "I knew it." They had planned everything: the fake signatures, the insurance claims, the explosion, all of it. They wanted the money, and when Harold refused to cooperate, they decided he was worth more dead than alive. When the trial began, I attended every single hearing. People stared at me, the quiet old widow sitting in the front row, dressed in black. They whispered, pitied, speculated. But I didn't care. I was there for Harold. Jake refused to look at me during the proceedings. Daniel did, but his eyes were full of regret, tears constantly threatening to fall. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, he finally broke down, whispering through sobs, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to matter. Jake, on the other hand, remained stone-faced. Even when he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, he didn't flinch. He just glanced at me once, eyes cold, and said, "You ruined our family." I met his gaze and said quietly, "No, Jake, you did." After the sentencing, I walked out of that courthouse into the sunlight. The air felt lighter, cleaner, but I wasn't celebrating. Justice doesn't heal wounds. It only stops them from festering. Officer Turner met me on the steps. "You did something brave, Mrs. Carter," he said. I smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for bravery. I did it for Harold." He nodded. He'd be proud. That night, I went back to the workshop. The walls were still scorched, but the smell of smoke had faded. I cleaned every corner, polished every tool, and hung Harold's apron back where it belonged. As I worked, I found a small box tucked behind one of the shelves. Inside were a few old photos, our wedding day, the boys as toddlers, and a letter in Harold's handwriting. My heart stopped as I opened it. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, I want you to remember something. The world will always test your kindness, but never let it turn into weakness. People may hurt you, even those you love most, but you must stay true to who you are. That's what makes us Carter strong. Love always, Harold." I read those words over and over, tears streaming down my face. All the pain, the fear, the betrayal, it all melted into something softer. Peace. The next morning, I took that letter and framed it on my nightstand. Beside it, I placed his wedding ring, still warm with memory. Life after the trial was quiet. The house felt too big, too still. Sometimes I'd catch myself setting 2 plates at dinner, then remembering there was only me. But there was peace in the stillness and dignity in survival. Sophie eventually left town. I heard she sold their house and moved somewhere far away, changing her name. I didn't wish her harm, only distance. As for Daniel, he wrote letters from prison, apologies, explanations, prayers for forgiveness. I never replied, but I kept them all in a small box. Maybe one day I'll forgive him, but not yet. Jake never wrote, not once, and that silence somehow hurt less than his words ever did. Now, years later, I still walk through Willowbrook, past the park where Harold used to bring me lemonade under the willow trees. People wave, they smile, they call me Mrs. Carter, but most don't know the story behind my eyes. Sometimes I stop under that same old tree, close my eyes and whisper, "I did it, Harold. I kept my promise." Because I did promise him that no matter how hard life became, I'd never let darkness win. And if there's one thing I've learned through it all, it's this: blood may bind us, but truth is what sets us free.